Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Track Talk Live. I am Miss Choo Choo, this is Mr. Clickety, and we're here to answer any and all of your model railroading questions. But it's been a while since we've done a Track Talk Live, so Doug, why don't you tell us what you've been up to lately?
Well, yes, the time goes by fast, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Well, the one thing, the exciting railroad thing that I did was that I went to a fine scale modeling convention in Albany, New York. It's a convention that some of the best modelers in the, well, even more than the country, in the world, show up to. And it's just a fantastic show on modeling, which means it's not just trains, it would be, say, structures, you know, anything to do with modeling. And the neat thing is in the modeling category now, is that, you know, there's all this new technology for 3D printing laser cutting and all that, and so, for example, I got a guy I work with in Raleigh, North Carolina, who's an N-scale, but he's doing Chicago, saying about the 1950s. Yeah. But you know, you still have skyscrapers. Well, if you're going to build a building that has hundreds of windows, I mean, it'd take it forever to build one building. So, but now with all this computer technology, if you can do the software,
you can print it.
If you know the software, you can cut all these out. And in the laser cut buildings, a lot of times, if you have layers of panels that go on, so you have the various layers depending on how the building is constructed, and you can, you know, you can laser cut. We are not necessarily cutting all the way through, but say you wanted to do brick or stone, you can actually cut mortar lines, so you're not cutting all the way
detailed,
through. Yeah, so you can actually just cut a little groove and not necessarily cut all the way through. But anyway, that's just exploding. So there's that part of it, and of course, there's also the kind of the old standard model building, where say you're building a wooden building, or maybe like some of these guys that like to build these old dilapidated narrow gauge railroads. You know, maybe the building is leaning over, and you know they build it so it's leaning over, or really horribly weathered, and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of neat things happening in the modeling, and I love that stuff. It got me inspired to work on my own.
Oh, really? Yeah. Sounds like a very cool convention.
Yeah. And so then I took a train after that. You know, I don't have to go into a lot of detail, but anyway, I took a train down to Raleigh, North Carolina to work with my buddy. Yeah. And so I went from Albany down the Hudson River, down to Penn Station in Manhattan, changed trains, and rode all the way on Amtrak from Penn Station, Manhattan, all the way down to Raleigh, North Carolina. And it basically took a day.
Wow, quick train ride.
The trains are high speed up there in that northeast corridor, and so my Amtrak train was the slow train on that line, going 110 miles an hour.
That was the slow train.
That was the slow train. The Acela goes 150 through there, but anyway, really a neat experience.
Sounds cool. Well, you also have some pictures that you brought today, so do you want to go through those right now?
Well, I can, yeah. No, I wanted to say I met a couple of guys who watched the show in Albany.
Cool.
And one of the guys sent me pictures of his layout, and I already had this stuff kind of queued up to go. So what I'm going to try to do is show more of the convention kind of stuff on our next Track Talk Live, which is December, I think we said 11th, December 11th?
Sure, I'm not 100% sure, but we'll plan on that.
So,
we're getting a thumbs up from the studio, so December 11th.
The photos I have here for our critique, and I hate to use that word because I'm not trying to badmouth anybody when they say critique, and I'm hoping
constructive criticism.
I'm hoping that people will send in photographs of their layouts so we can critique them.
But I do think it's important to provide some kind of criticism so that you can grow from it, so that there's a little bit of information that comes
so critique in a good way. But anyway, these photos I have here are of a local guy, and he started building his layout about 35 years ago. So this would be a guy in Minneapolis.
All right.
And I wanted to show you this. He models the primarily the Santa Fe Railroad out in Southwest, but local, but models the Santa Fe. So anyway, we can go start with picture one here. This is an example of his layout, just in one section of the layout. It's a big layout. Let me see, I'm doing the dots. Why can't I remember that?
I hope you're putting a filter on it.
Markup, that's what I want.
There you go.
Okay, sorry folks. Anyway, now look at this scene. This is really a neat scene. I mean, there's really nothing to critique that I can think of. But one of the things this guy does is he scratch builds his own track and hand lays it. He doesn't buy commercial stuff. And you can see even by the look of the, like say by the look of the ties as an example here. you know, they don't look like plastic. They look, they really look like real wood. I mean, it's so well done. And look at the, for example, there's some switches, like say back in here, this Y switch. I mean, this is something that you really, that shape of switch you couldn't even buy commercially.
Oh, so he custom made
and so he
himself,
just assembles it to meet the, to fit the situation, the location. Same with this, probably the switch right here would be another example where it's a curve switch. Sorry, my marking is so bad.
You can hold it flat if that's easier.
Yeah, a curve switch. So you can see that he would do it as a real railroad would do, and just would fit the track work into the situation. But I mean, everything is so well done. You look at the wood shingles on the roof of this building. Yeah, that does make it easier if I don't have to hold it. And the wood grade crossings. Anyway, I think it's just a fabulous scene. I can't think of anything. You know, how would you improve that?
Yeah, it looks really good.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next one.
Okay, press done.
Done. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Scroll.
And then done on the bottom again.
Oh. Done. What am I doing wrong?
Oh, it's done up there.
Oh, that one. Okay. There. Okay. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Now here is another. Here's another picture, and this. He told me, now this bridge is actually a model of a real bridge on the Santa Fe Railroad in the Southwest, and I forget exactly where it's located now. But this was made before, I mean, nowadays you can buy a lot of parts that, you know, are cast out of plastic, you know, a lot of, you know, manufactured parts, where this was built before that. This is built decades ago. And I don't know if you can see on here, but there's a lattice work on these, oops. Sorry.
Right.
Edit.
There you go. You got it.
On these tower vents, like say this one right here, the four-legged vents, there's actually a lattice work on each one of the legs where there's these little crisscrosses like this in the leg, you know?
Yeah.
Does that show up good on the screen? And he built each one of those little X's in those legs individually, like little tiny little strips of plastic.
That's a lot of little X's to make.
And yeah, and this is, I mean, this bridge is, oh gads, I don't know, I don't even have the whole bridge in the picture. It's probably 8 feet long. That's just a tremendous amount of modeling work. Let's see what else. Is there anything else that, I mean, the rest of it looks pretty doggone good, I think. You know, he's modeling the Southwest. There's not a lot of trees. So, yeah. So if anybody out there wants to make comments on these photos, be sure and do that. So I'm doing done. Yeah. Okay. Now here's another one. Same layout. Another part of the layout. It's a mine scene. It's probably my photography might be a little bit darker, so you can't, you know, that you can critique me on that. But overall, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know much I can change. I mean, you know, he's got weathering on the roadway, which I like. Oh, I thought I didn't do that. You look at the roadway here, and it's weathered up. I mean, I suppose if there's only one little criticism, you could, you know, where the concrete roadway ends over here, you could possibly feather that into the gravel a little bit. It probably wouldn't be that straight of a line, but I mean that's pretty. I mean that's pretty minor. But overall, I think it's a real good scene. And there again, if anybody has any comments about it, certainly like to hear from you. I'm going to do done on this one.
Done and done.
And we're going to go to the next one. Now, this is kind of interesting. I just wanted to show this. This is a control panel that he built probably 30 years ago with toggle switches, and I mean he's still using it. Oh. And he actually, because he was kind of old school, he's just now converting over to DCC.
Oh, really?
But this is the type of panel that you would use for the old analog type trains with the old kind of heavy-duty toggle switches, you know, and all that. So this is, but it's a well done version of the type of control panel that you would use 30 years ago, and he's still using it. You know, it still works.
Hey, if it's not broken, you don't have to fix it.
But I just wanted to show that just for fun because it was kind of a neat one. Now, this is something different. This is an absolutely beautiful scene. There's absolutely nothing I could mark up on it.
Very detailed, very nice.
There's a place in Troy, New York, up the river from Albany, called the Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute.
Okay.
And it was actually founded in 1824.
Wow, a long time ago.
And a lot of the really early scientific and engineering well-known people in the United States back in that era went to that school there. I mean, it was a renowned school. Well, anyway, over the decades, the students have built this model railroad down there. So the layout was started, I think I heard about it 50 years ago. I mean, it's been a long time. Well, anyway, I've heard about it for all these years, and I was up in Albany, so I wanted to go up and see this. And they had this, the layout open as part of the show in Albany. And, I mean, you look at this scene here, and, I mean, look at that rock work. I mean, that is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
The stone retaining wall below the track.
What kind of material did they use? Well,
I'm sure, this was done, before the era of the fancy techniques. And so I'm sure they used some type of plaster. They may have used some rock molds, but then a lot of it was probably hand carved, I'm guessing.
Wow.
And this is a model of a scene that actually exists on the Delaware and Hudson, or the old Delaware and Hudson Road along the Lake Champlain.
Wow.
So it's actually a model of a real scene. But there's poles there. I mean, it's just beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, they've got some nice gradient of color in the water, too. It's not all just a flat blue. They've got a variety.
And so there again, this is probably older techniques, but it's they weathered the test of time. I mean, it's just fantastic modeling. So here's another scene up there, which this is another scene that actually is taken from real life. And the foliage, I mean, look at the beautiful job they did with the foliage, and then the carved rock at the two tunnel portals there. And I'm guessing this is probably an example on the real railroad where they had one tunnel and they wanted to double track it, and so they ended up, one track was probably older than the other one on the real railroad. But these are models of existing scenes up there.
Yeah, it looks really nice.
Here's another scene.
Got some cows.
Looks like a little bit out of focus, which is my fault again. But steam train, up in the upper Hudson River area, basically. And just so well done. The texture and the grass, it's not all just one color or one texture. I mean, anytime you're modeling, the texture is really as important as the color.
Yeah.
And so there's some water off to the right-hand side in that picture, kind of a backwater to the river and telephone poles. Anyway, beautiful scene. Now here's another one taken in that same area as the first picture, but a train coming the other way is a double-headed steam locomotive. And you can kind of see those rock bluffs off to the right there. But I mean, look at that. I mean, it's fantastic. All the overgrowth, a lot of that looks like lichen, and they've put you can see some dead branches and things in there to give it texture and what have you. But
such a variety of trees.
Yeah, if anybody is up in that area, you have to go to the Rensselaer Polytech Institute, RPI Institute website, and find out when they're open. And I think they're only open, say, one day a month.
They have select
or
hours.
Something like that to the public. So you check that out, but it's really just amazing for a layout that's probably 50 years old.
Yeah.
What they've done with it is just absolutely fantastic, and done by students at the college. Now here's another photograph of a yard area.
Yeah.
But there you look at the beautiful track work.
Oh my
This
gosh.
is all handmade switches again.
We've got an awfully long backdrop, I assume. I see it there.
Yeah, I mean,
off
there's
at the end.
still things they're working on here, but I mean, you look at that, it's so well done. Here's another view, tunnel.
Some more of that nice hand-carved rock.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so now I wanted to show you, and this, I put it on here, but I also got it so Nate can put it on or you got it on the screen. This is was the program for this expo I went to, the Fine Scale Model Expo in Albany, New York, and they do a Fine Scale Expo every year, and not sure. I think I may have heard where it's going to be next year, but you can go online and find out. But I mean, look at the quality of the photograph on the cover there. You can look at what's on the screen. This is a photograph of George Celios' layout. And he lives in Peabody.
Oh.
Peabody, Massachusetts. And you look at the scene. You can just study the scene for a long time. There's so many little details there in this picture. It's just an amazing amount of detail work. If you look in the background, really fantastic. So I just wanted to show off. I got another brochure here just to show off
some other props.
Just kind of what I saw up there. This is another Foss scale models. I didn't do a photograph of that one, but Nate can zoom in on it. This is another guy who actually has an art degree.
Oh.
Who is in the model business, and this is his catalog. But Foss scale models, he does some incredible models, and I have pictures of some of his models that were on display at the show, and I'll show those probably next time. But just unbelievable model work, and that's what these people like to focus on.
Yeah.
I like this one, Pier 27. That's kind of neat because I like railroads in water.
Yeah.
The combination. But anyhow, so I didn't want to go too far with that. And then actually I wanted to call out a couple of guys that watched the show that I met up there. Jim Walsh is the guy who actually gave me a copy of this book. He thought I'd be interested in it. It has some narrow gauge stuff in it.
Cool.
And books like this are especially designed for people who are into the intricate scale models.
Yeah.
And you look at the model on the cover of this.
ones.
I mean, this is just a beautiful model of a gas station.
Yeah, looks really nice.
So anyway, to Jim Walsh, thank you.
Thanks for watching.
And then Dave Sullivan, I don't have pictures to show this time, but next week, Dave Sullivan from New Jersey sent me pictures of what he's working on. There's some beautiful models. And so be sure, you folks out there who are watching, send photos. We want to see photos. We won't badmouth them.
No, we won't.
We'll be nice.
Tune in next time and we'll show those photos that we have.
And I'm going to show you more of this stuff. This is kind of interesting. My buddy Gator Dave Myers.
Gator Dave.
Gator Dave sells this stuff. It's called Gator Board. I had a little chunk of it over there. But anyway, I'm going to show that next time. It's really super it's kind of like a sheetrock type of material, but it's got a real lightweight kind of a foam center, and it's great for doing, like, say, a baseboard for dioramas and that sort of thing. So he sent me a whole packet of just kind of miscellaneous stuff that we'll look at in the future.
Cool.
So, okay, that's all I have for show and tell. I think, wait, one more thing.
One more.
So I got home, and I got to do something on my layout. I was thinking about it. So I had a general store on my layout. I don't know if I've shown a picture of it. Maybe next week I can show that, the exterior of it. But I thought, I got to do an interior in the building because these guys like to do interiors, and so this one is off to your right is the front of the hardware store. And actually I have Miniatronics light bulbs with shades on these wood strip panels, and I have them, I don't know if you kind of seen the picture, but I designed kind of a groove. So actually these panels can slide out of the way when I'm working on the interior, but then they can slide off to the right so I can space them out over the interior.
Yeah.
So they're slidable, and then the wires go off to the back end where they would connect to my layout. But so I had some of these things, and when you're doing an interior, and I'm doing S-scale, but you don't have to do anything too fancy. You're going more for shapes and colors, and and so I just had some kind of junky stuff sitting around. I had some of these workbenches from Model Tech, so I just put them in there. So, for example, this one here and this one here. Actually, they are workbenches you can buy in different scales from this outfit called Model Tech. And they're actually more for like a workshop or something, but they work for a hardware store counter. They work great. So then I just put in, odd things. I had, these are some pieces of Atlas lumber loads, if you remember those in HO, and I made little tables out of them. And down here I just had some yellow things, and I had, this was actually receipt off of something that was red, the price sticker, and I took it off, and
That works.
anything to show up. So, and I actually have added more since I did this. I actually have a couple of people in there, and so my viewing angle is this way through these windows. So actually, you're looking in this way and with the lights on, and normally I'm not running my layout at night. I mean, I'm not really designing it for that, but I wanted to have some interior lights on that would be typically on during the day.
Yeah.
You know? So you look in through these windows over here, and you can see this interior, and it's not, you know, you can't see a lot of detail, but you see shapes and colors and all that. And so I'm going to work on more of my buildings. That's one of the project I have now for maybe next time I'll show something else I'm working on. But now I want you folks to please send me photos of things you're working on, and we'll talk about them.
All right. Are you ready for some questions?
Okay, ready for questions now.
We've got quite a few coming in, and I have some pre-submitted ones too. So feel free. We have a chat below. You can start asking some more questions, and we'll try and get to as many as we can in the time we have. So our first question is from just a guest in the chat, and it says, I'm having a hard time creating a winter scene in my set. Do you have any advice on how to create realistic-looking snow and ice?
Well, you know, people have done that.
They have.
And it's tricky because the snow on a model railroad tends to get dusty, dirty after
white
a while.
shows a lot of imperfections.
And you got to be careful not to get it into the wheels and everything. But people are typically they'll use, for the snow on the ground, use a sifted plaster.
Oh, okay.
And just
like
with a sifter, sift it down. Well, you have to leave. I mean, it doesn't really look good unless you leave it loose. You know, unless you want to do like a big, heavy, heavy snowfall. But generally speaking, you just have to do it kind of loose. And then if it gets dirty or messed up, then you have to go do some more. But it's tough. And then for ice, depending what you want to do, if you want to have more clear ice, I've seen people use just clear plastic or frosted plastic. Or you can take clear plastic and actually do a spray flat finish from the underside and make it look frosted.
Yeah.
I've even seen people use glass. I mean, in the old days, people used glass because we didn't have the clear plastic. But I think clear plastic is fine. And if you want to give it a kind of a little bluish tint, you can do that from the underside.
Yeah, paint on it a little bit.
So it's tricky. People do that for diorama scenes where they're not really using it as a full-time operating model.
Not running trains through it.
It's tough to keep it clean, but that's my best suggestions.
All right. Our next question is from DPB326. I'm trying to model moving water. What is the best technique?
Well, I think we've talked about this before. Depending on how deep you want the water to be, I mean, there are different ways of getting started with the water. I mean, you can certainly use like something like Envirotex, which dries smooth, but you can get a depth with that. You know, it flattens out. So you can start out with that, or I mean, people have used ripple glass or ripple glass or you know, clear plastic, whatever for the base. But then. And there are various water blends you can buy, like realistic water from Woodland Scenics and that kind of thing. And I've used basically start out with gloss gel.
Oh, I was getting ready to put my gloss sign.
Gloss gel, and we've talked about that, which is actually the thick version of
gloss
this.
medium.
And you can put in ripples and waves, and you know. And the thing I like about this acrylic medium is that it is a slow drying, so you can take your time, and it's like putting frosting on a cake. You know, you can kind of shape the water the way you want it, and you can put coloring into it. Because you're going to probably want to do multiple layers. So if you want to have like foam in it, you can paint in foam. I use that iridescent white, kind of a
sort of pearly looking
white color for the foam, and you can put. You know, you can put things into the water. If you're doing it a layer at a time, you can put, you know, whatever, a tree branch or something that's in the water as part of that scene. You can just bury it in the medium. And then, of course, you can use over the top. You can use, ta-da!
Matte medium or gloss medium?
Gloss medium. Yeah, gloss medium for the water effect. And then, you know, it's easy to do. And I mean, you might end up putting a dozen coats down, but so what? It's, you know, it's easy to do. Just take your time and just keep working with it. I mean, that's what I do. So there's more ways than one to do it, but I like that. And I think we talked at the last show about a waterfall. If you're going to do a rapids, I've actually used tinsel.
Oh yeah, putting that in there.
I like tinsel, and you can glue it down with even, say, white glue, just in place, and you know it can be kind of twisty, you know.
Yep.
And then you paint over it, and you have that sort of that sparkly,
Shimmery,
the sparkly rapid effect.
It looks nice in there. All right, our next question is from Lean, who asks, any recommendations on working with Markland HO scale layouts?
I wonder what she means in particular.
Ever worked with them?
Well, I'm familiar with Markland. It's German, and I mean it's pretty much the same as an American set. I wonder, maybe if she's watching, maybe you could email back in and just tell me what in particular your question is.
What specifically?
Yeah.
Let's see. Our next question is, what is the best glue to assemble a laser cut wood kit?
Well, you know, I've used different things, but I'm actually, we could actually do a sign for this, but I like super glue.
Oh.
But you know, I use Gorilla super glue, and I'm not giving them a plug, but there's something about Gorilla.
Very strong.
Very well, the super glue, not the. You know, Gorilla has a lot of different glues, but they have a little, you know, like the typical super glue bottle about so big. And there's something they say it has these very small little granules of rubber in it. I don't know, whatever, but it makes it really work good. And I've had such good luck with it. And the other thing, as far as the longevity, most super glue tends to go bad kind of quick once you open it, and people tend to put it in the refrigerator
that's a good tip.
which you can do to give you more time. But I've never had to do that with Gorilla. I just set it on my workbench, and it always seems to work. So I like super glue because you can just put a very small amount down. You're putting these laser pieces together, then it can be quite delicate. So you don't need a whole lot of glue. So you can even buy an extension tip for them, which is kind of a very thin piece of tubing, you know.
Kind of like a cone.
Well, it's a kind of a flexible thing that you can put on the tip. It already has kind of a pointed tip, you know. If you go to the hobby shop and you can buy an extension thing with it's a sort of a flexible little tube, and so you can get into these tiny little spots with put just a tiny amount of glue. And if you're worried about it getting too much glue, you can also put the super glue out on something that would, like wax paper or tin foil or even a little piece of glass, something that would not be absorbent. And then I use the fine tip round toothpicks with a point, you know. I buy a pack of those, and then you can just put a little bit on your toothpick and then reach right in there and
dab it right in?
Yeah, so.
All right. Our next question is from Miff Jeller, who asks, I can't find a decent logging locomotive. Do you have any suggestions?
Does he say a scale?
Nope.
Well, there are definitely ones out there. I mean, it's probably more in HO than any other scale, just mainly because HO is more popular. But even in the big scale stuff, like our track out front here, out here, you know, you can buy. There's logging locomotives available. I mean, look online. I mean, the Walthers catalog, or even Walthers online, is a good place to start because they have everything. And so you can look through there and get ideas, and you can also look at the individual manufacturers' websites too and see what's out there. Or go to a train show. I mean, the show I was at, as an example, had a whole room full of vendors. And they show off their wares. So go to some train shows. Go to meets. The NMRA, National Model Railroad Association, has annual meets, and there are local, regional meets all over the place. So
go talk to some people. All right, our next question is from Dennis, who asks, I'm currently planning a multi-stage layout with multi-receiving and departure yards. Once the layout is planned, how do you plan your power districts, and how do you determine how many amps each district will have?
Now, what scale is he in, does he say?
It doesn't say a scale.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, you're not running, if you're using a staging yard, you're not using all the tracks at the same time anyway. Generally, that's where you park the trains, and you're running a train in or a train out or something. So there's probably no more than a couple of trains at a time in each yard. Now, you can certainly break it up into power districts, although I guess I wouldn't get too crazy. In HO, I mean, you're only drawing, you know, not even an amp. Even if you had lighted cars, you probably wouldn't be drawing an amp. So the standard HO DCC systems are about 5 amps, and so you can run a lot with 5 amps. And then if that's not enough, you can boost it up to 10 amps is the next jump up. And as far as power districts go, and then mainly you do that because if you have a derailment and it shorts it out someplace, you don't want it to shut everything down. And so I like to have a separate power district on the throats of the yards, because that's where, if you're going to have a derailment, that's probably the more likely spot it would happen. So you can put a separate power district in there with a circuit breaker on it. You can use multiple circuit breakers, and I think that's a good way to go. The fancy circuit breakers actually have you can adjust the trip point, so you can set it for whatever current you might think you're going to be using.
Yeah. All right. Our next question is from Richard, who asks, how do you make real-looking streams or rivers on a layout? So bodies of moving water. Oh, is it time for the sign?
Well, we talked about that before, and if you're doing moving water, I mean, you can do a base with the pour and stuff, which tends to want to flatten out. I mean, it's supposed to self-level. But then after that, you know, I mean, I like gloss, well, gel. We have to do
gloss, a gel medium?
Gloss gel, the thick version of this, because you can work with it and you can shape it.
Oh.
And so depending on what you're doing, I've seen people actually use latex, clear latex caulk, where they actually squirt it down with a caulk gun, you know, and kind of do it. But I've never had that much luck with that. I'd rather, to me, it's just too hard to work with. I like taking my time and getting the ripples in the way I want them. And like, say you had a rock protruding in the middle of the stream, you know, and you want to have the current flowing around the rock.
Pushing against it,
Yeah, well, so you can do that. You can actually take a brush and paint the shape in the way you want the water to come around the rock. And then, like as we said earlier, you can add color if you want to do foam around it. You can add colors, or if you want to actually color the water, you can actually, if you don't want to have just clear, you can, if you want to have dirty water, green water, brown water, you can add color as you go. And if you do multiple layers, the color is sort of buried, and so the top layers would be the gloss, and then the lower layers, so it gives you the depth effect.
Yeah.
And you know, you can darken the center even more to
make it look deep.
To force the look of the depth of the water too. So.
All right. Our next question is from Paul, who asks, what is your opinion on printable buildings for model railroads?
Well, you know, that technology is really improving too. Yeah. And depending on what you're using, I mean, people now are printing their own buildings. I mean, if you use, when I was in Albany, a guy was using the SketchUp software.
Oh yeah, that's woodworkers use that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can actually design your own buildings and print them out.
Wow.
If you have the right equipment. And if you don't have really good quality equipment, you can actually, there are places around, I found out, where you can bring your software to them. They have the machines, you know, the printers and the cutters and all that stuff, and you can basically rent their machines for whatever you need, an hour or something. That way you don't have to buy an expensive machine yourself. So I mean, pretty much all the buildings in my layout are scratch built, although I didn't do it with a computer. I did them by hand, and of course you can do them by hand, but this computer stuff is so cool. You can try out windows and doors and different things and just lay them out on the computer, and then what you can do then is actually print out a paper version of your building and just fold it together and stand it up and see if you like the look of it.
Yeah, just test it out.
Before you do your final cut or print.
It's always nice to just test it out first before committing to a full one. All right, Still Plays with Trains from YouTube asks, what do you think is the best brand of model trains? Do you have a favorite brand?
Well, boy, that leaves the thing wide open. I mean, it's hard to sell. There's so much good stuff out there now with all this, you know, the computer modeling process and molding, and everything is so much better than it used to be. I mean, we laugh about the old the HO trains we had years ago by Athearn, which had a motor with a horizontal shaft and then rubber bands that went down to a drum on the axle. You know, so you're actually the locomotive would stop and go like that on the rubber bands.
Because it has all that give,
And so things have improved markedly. I mean, there's so much good stuff out there. And then the other thing, too, it's kind of subjective. I mean, what I think is good may not be the same thing somebody else thinks is good. And of course, I'm buying S-scale stuff now, and I like what I have. I think it's good quality. But it's really tough to say.
A difficult question.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is from BNSF Northern California Trains from YouTube, asking, Miss Choo Choo, do you have a train layout? I do not.
You should have one.
I don't have one, no.
You should start one.
I should.
Yeah.
Comment below what you think my train layout should be. All right. Shirley asks, I am building a town in 1/4 scale, and I have found gutter in 3/8 scale from Northeastern, but I'm thinking that's going to be too large. What do you think?
Well, you know, that's a good question. You might be able to cut it down. I have a miniature table saw that I bought from Micro Markets about, I don't know, maybe not
A
even
foot?
16, maybe 12, 14 inches square, with a real fine tooth blade.
Oh.
And it's amazing what you can cut on that thing. And so, I mean, real gutters come in different sizes, so
Yeah.
maybe you could kind of fake it. But if you think it's too big, you could certainly cut it down on a miniature saw.
Yeah, just trim it up.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next question is from Jared Reynolds asking, I want to create a beautiful business car that I photographed recently, the Ohio Central Sugar Creek. Any tips of kit bashing or modifying a standard Athearn, or is it
Athearn,
Athearn,
yeah.
HO heavyweight observation to closely recreate the actual car?
Well, you could certainly do that, and I love private varnish myself, and I'm not being familiar with the real car.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it looks like, but you could certainly do that. There's also I've used it's a steel sidecar. You could use a Riverosity, which is a full-length car. The Athearn is, I think, about a 65-foot car.
Yeah.
The Riverosity is a full 80-foot car, and I've actually used those cars. So, yeah, without seeing the car, I would say, depending on what you want, you could certainly take an Athearn and lengthen it, if that might be the case, you know. Then depending on the window setup, too. I mean, you could maybe use, like, say, if you're going to kit bash an Athearn car, maybe use a different type of car, maybe even a coach or something that would have the right windows for the particular part of the car. So, you know, kit bash different sorts of cars together to make the windows work. See, there again, if you had a laser cutter,
Oh, yeah.
you could just make the whole thing, just print it out yourself and make it exactly what, you know, if you had plans, you could just copy the real plans.
Convenient. All right, our next question is from Don, who asks, I have some IR switches, a small dark bulb or darker on one side, then the other 4-prong or wires coming out of the bottom. Which wire goes where?
Well, we don't know what brand he's talking about
Yeah.
first. Let me think. I think the infrared one is the one that's the dark color, and the receiver is yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. The receiver is a lighter color. But yeah, not knowing what brand you have, I mean, even if I knew what brand you have, I'd have to look it up because offhand I wouldn't remember the wire colors.
Where would you look it up?
Well, I would go to the manufacturer's website.
Oh, okay.
That'd be the first thing.
Just
I mean,
straight
they should have some instructions online, I would think.
All right. Oh, we also have a clarification from the question about the logging locomotives
Oh, yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
That was an N scale.
Ooh.
Done a lot of work in N scale, or much in there?
Well,
Probably
you
not.
know, in scale. You know, I'd have to think on that. Offhand, I can't tell you. He's probably looking for like a geared locomotive, a Shay or something
Yeah.
like that. And offhand, I'm not sure what might be available in. Sorry about that. Bachman, maybe? You could
Yeah.
look at Bachman.
Reliable. Oh, also, BNSF Northern California Train says that I should do HO scale, but I think you would debate I should do S scale if I started a train layout myself.
We could have a little conversation about that.
Oh,
You know.
competing are different scales.
First of all, you have to know what you want to model. You know,
That's true.
what locale, what era. You know, we have to kind of pin down that first before you even decide to scale. Then, of course,
true.
your space available will kind of
Yes.
help dictate the scale. But I'm all for it.
Okay. Our next question is from Frederick Chandler, who asks, on an HO scale, which is better to use, the easy track or the 100 track?
Well, both of those actually I would consider it more of a starter level kind of trackage. So from the standpoint of a starter level, I don't think it really matters. I mean, the easy track already has the roadbed built into it, so if you're just going to set it up on a tabletop or something like that, the easy track is easy to put together, and you can take it back apart and, you know, reconfigure it and all that kind of thing. And so if you want extreme simplicity, I'd say the easy track. And you saw some of these pictures that we had on earlier about the hand-laid track.
Yeah.
And so if you really get serious about the hobby, you're going to go to, you're going to elevate yourself into something, a little more sophisticated anyway. So, yeah, maybe easy track.
Okay. Our next question is from Robert in Florida, working in HO scale, who asks, HO is 1/87th scale. So if you buy a bridge 85 feet long, how long in actuality would it be in 1/87th scale feet? And how do you come to that conclusion?
Well, okay, HO is 1/87th actual size.
Do some math.
So if you have a bridge that's 85 feet in real feet, and you want to know how long it would be in HO, you divide it by 87, right?
Yeah.
So that would be 85 divided by 87, which would be
I'm bad at quick math in my
slightly,
head.
well, slightly less than 1 foot. It would
Yeah,
be.
a little bit less.
Yeah, a little bit, because 87, if it was an 87-foot bridge, it would be exactly 1 foot. So, yeah, a tiny bit less than a foot.
There's your formula. Our next question is from Keith in Kansas City, Missouri, working in HO scale as well. Hi, I'm wanting to hand lay all my track as modern as possible, and I was wondering how to get the metal tie plates that go underneath the rails.
You know, they were available, and I think they're actually plastic, to be honest. I don't think they're actually metal. But I would check, I think, Chemtron. I've seen it. I'm not even sure if they're still around anymore because the kind of the techniques are changing. But yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking Chemtron maybe. Yeah, search them out online and see what you can come up with, or maybe if I have some time, I can try to research it. But Precision Scale Models, I think, actually is the one that sells Chemtron now, so you could check them.
All right. James asks, Mod Podge versus matte medium for sealing ballast and scenery. What do you prefer?
Well, I think it's basically the same thing. I think they just put a Mod Podge label on it and sell it.
Matte medium.
So you could use either one. I mean,
but we have a sign for matte medium, so I'd say.
So we don't play favorites with the brand names.
No.
But no, you could either one of those you'd want to thin. Because you don't want to use them full strength for ballast. And what I like to do is use, we've talked about this in past shows, but use pretty much anything you use in model railroading where you use water. It's wetted water, so you put a little bit of dish soap in there to break down the surface tension. So I have a little spray bottle. I don't like those really big ones. They're just hard to handle. Get a little plant spray bottle and put in wetted water, just 2-3 drops of soap into a jug of water and spray the ballast with it. And that way it'll break down the surface tension for the glue, and then the glue will be thinned also. And you can spray it if you have a lot of surface area, or I take when I use up, say, like a standard white glue bottle, you know, with a pointed tip on it, the orange cap. Put the glue in there, and then you have you have kind of a spreader. You can go down the track. And also a trick, if you're doing it on an embankment, I found if I do the edges first, you know, because you're gonna have a kind of a slope, the ballast in the center, and then a slope down the embankment. If I glue the embankment first and let that dry, and not the center of the track, follow me, and then you can come back and do the center after it's dry. That way you're not going to wash the glue down that embankment. See? So you just wet both embankments, not the center, glue them, let them dry overnight or something, and then come back and do the center. All
right, sounds good. Our next question is a little bit of a long one, but this one is from Clarence in Cincinnati, Ohio, working in HO scale. And he asks, I have Bachmann Easy Track running AC 6000 on a laminate floor in my basement. The layout is 35 feet in length, and since I'm having problems only running the engine at the slowest speed possible to pick up any problems that may be prevalent. Oh, he's running it slow to pick up problems. The engine stops 3 or 4 times, usually in different shots on the layout. It may run through shots that it stopped at previously, and sometimes it may not. My only consistent problem area is right before the engine leaves a DCC turnout. At this point, the engine has no power at all. Pressing on the track, shims don't work, cleaning the engine wheels and on the track doesn't work, and I have another DCC turnout doing the same thing in a different place on the layout. Any thoughts about this problem? Does expansion and contraction cause these types of problems, and should I take the track off the floor?
Well, I don't think the floor is the issue. I think it sounds to me like you have an insulated frog, or you do have insulated frog switches. Because he's calling them DCC, and so for DCC they give you an insulated frog, which would actually be a little bit of a dead section. Now, for small stuff like N scale, you can bigger stuff. The locomotive is long enough; you can kind of run right over a little dead section. It doesn't matter. But on the small stuff, they generally have to power that frog, which is generally powered from a switch control, a switch motor, or hand throw with contacts on it. So it sounds to me like if you have an insulated frog, and you can look at the frog itself and see if it's insulated on all 4 rails that come off the frog. If it is, then your locomotive is stopping on that frog. You can also get a test light. Get a little test light and put it across there and see where the dead section is. Anyway, if it is dead and it's causing your stuff to quit, you can add a power feeder to it. If you have an electro frog where the frog is powered from the points that actually touch the rail when you throw the switch. You know what the points are, the sharp points on the other end of the switch. They can get dirty and not give you good contact. So it's if you don't have an insulated frog, I would check the back side of your points where they touch the rail when the switch throws. When you throw the switch, you're changing the polarity depending on what rail that the points are touching. So it could be you have either you have a dead frog and need to feed it, or you have dirty switch points.
All right, 2 options to check out there. Our next question is from John in Inverness, Scotland. So someone in Scotland working in N-gauge. And he asks, what is the best way to solder power to rails?
An N scale.
Yep.
Well, you know, what I would recommend if he's just building his layout is, because that rail is so doggone small.
Yeah.
And you don't want to use any wire. I mean, you obviously want to solder on the outside of the rail, not where the wheel flange would be on the outside of the rail, but still you can have a big ugly gob on the side of the rail and N scale. And so the best thing is to solder on the bottom before you lay the track. Solder feeders on the bottom of the rail. And drill holes so you can, as you lay the track, then you can run the feeders right through your surface, whatever it is. So that's what I'd recommend. That's the best way. Then you don't see the feeders at all. Once the track is down and ballasted, you can't see any feeders. All
right. Our next question is from Bernie Coopers in Hershey, which I assume is Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And he asks, any suggestions to make power wire connections to LGB brass track that does not use the screw clamp on connectors? I don't want to solder either. I'm being fussy about the look of the connection. Perhaps drilling? Please help.
Well, you could drill. I've seen people do that, drill little tiny holes and put in screws. Well, kind of following on the same idea from the other question, the previous question, you know, what I've actually done, because I do a lot of commercial G-scale, is the commercial track, I use those screw-on connectors because you don't really see them, but you can actually solder onto the bottom of the rail joiner itself. Yeah. You know, it's hard to solder onto the rail because that rail, if we get down close up here, you know, the rail is so big it acts like a heat sink if you try to solder. But if you take the rail, take this apart here. Take the actual rail joint, joiner off, and solder right onto the bottom of that. Yeah. Do we need a close-up on that? Anyway, right here, solder onto the bottom of there before you lay the track again. And then you put it all together, and then the same idea, you drill a hole and you go down and you can't see any wire. And of course you're using heavier gauge wire with the G-scale. Yeah. So, and it's much easier to solder on the bottom of the rail joiner than it is the actual rail.
To hide it. All right, our next question is from John. We just answered that one. Timothy in New Jersey, working in HO scale, who asks, what is a re-rail frog?
Well, that's actually, it's a unit, and they come in different shapes and designs depending on what brand, and you can even home make one. But the idea is if a set of wheels comes off of the track, and well, let me take this.
Break it off, yeah.
If it comes off the track, you know, one of the side of the wheel set is going to be running down the middle, and so it's actually kind of a pointed, sort of a diamond-shaped thing that would catch that flange that's loose and then guide it back over to the rail. You follow me?
Yeah. Yep.
So this is running down the center and guides it back to the rail, and then it gets to a point where it actually there's a kind of a high spot in this plate, and so it rides it right back up onto the track again. So. These are pretty simple. You can home make them. I made them out of like masonite sheet. You just cut that shape into them, but most scales have them factory made where you can buy them and put them in. So yeah, that's good. And I actually like to put them in hidden track. I mean, they're kind of ugly, so you probably don't want to use them on scenic track. But if you have like you have track in a tunnel, or in the back where you can't get it, you know, I've told you that one of the axioms of model railroading is it never derails in the front. It's always in the back where you can't get it. That's where it comes off. So cheap insurance, just put some re-railers in the back, and if it happens to come off back there, we'll put it back on. So.
All right, our next question is from Jared Reynolds again in the chat. Hello, Jared. Which HO scale motor would you recommend that would provide great pulling effort when it is time to replace a worn or old motor?
Well, I'll tell you what, can motor is definitely the way to go, and most models nowadays have can motors with flywheels, so you get not only the good quality low current draw motor, but you also get the flywheel effect to make it run smooth. And if you go to the Northwest Shortline website, they have every million sizes of can motors and millimeter sizes, and they're round, of course, so you just have to figure out what diameter motor and what length motor will fit into your particular application, and then you can buy a universal and flywheels to go with them, and universal joints to connect to whatever the rest of your drivetrain is. And so you might have, like say a millimeter shaft on a motor, and then maybe a U.S. diameter, say a 1/8 diameter shaft on the gearbox. So you can actually buy universal joints that'll connect you up. And generally the motors can just be laid into the frame of your locomotive with silicone. Put a little bit of silicone in there and put the motor right in there and let it sit, and it's like a custom shaped motor mount.
Oh, there you go. All right, our next question is from Bud in Colorado, working HO scale. I have a lot of telephone wire. Is that sufficient gauge for wiring switches, lighting, and accessories?
Yeah, I mean, if he's talking about that solid conductor, I've used a lot of that solid conductor in the old days, but there's some of that phone wire that's more almost like tinsel, the wires inside of it, really thin stuff, and it's hard to even work with. But, a solid conductor, you can use it. I mean, I've seen, I think I've used commercial phone wire that had like 25 pairs in it or something. So you can, and they're all color coded, which is great. So you can certainly use that. Solid wire is a little, not as easy to work with because it doesn't want to bend as easy. And all that. But you're talking about pretty light gauge wire. So, you can certainly use it.
Cool. Okay, our next question is from Julian in West Virginia, working in S scale. Question is nickel, silver versus brass. What are the cons and pros of all of them?
Well, brass is pretty much out. I mean, that's old technology. Brass oxidizes real easy, and the oxidation is not conductive. And
it gets that green color.
Big pain, and you'd have to clean it all the time. And no, I mean, you can hardly buy a brass rail anymore. It's just pretty much out. So, nickel, silver for sure. And I'm using, I think I mentioned this on shows in the past, but I'm doing a switching short line in S scale, and I'm using hand-laid track and custom-built switches, but I'm using code 70 nickel silver, which is small rail for S, but it's an industrial trackage, and it would be light gauge rail, and I really like the look of it. I'm using Proto 64 wheels, which have the traditional wheel shape, the realistic wheel shape. So if you have any more questions, be sure and let us know, but I definitely recommend nickel silver rail in whatever size that you want to use.
Okay, our next question is from Peter in Alberta, Canada, working in HO scale. The question is, when handling track, how/when do you glue down the ballast? Also, who makes good ballast material, and do you mix/combine several coarsenesses or make it uniform?
Well, there again depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and Hughes and what scale?
Let's see. HO scale.
HO scale. Well, Woodland Scenics is the kind of the premier. I mean, they make all different kinds of ballast and all different grades and colors and everything. And a lot of the real railroads would use ballast that came from quarries that were nearby. It just makes sense. So the color would kind of vary depending on what railroad line, and actually even the texture would vary depending on the railroad line that you're modeling. So I would make sure everything works really good before you ballast it. I mean, the idea is lay the track, test it all out, run it, make sure the track work is perfect before you ballast it, because if you you need to rip it up, it's a lot more work after you've ballasted it. So
make sure it's good before you put it down. Our next question is from Spencer, who asks, for DCC, is NCC or Digitrax or Roco better?
Well, you could start a fist fight with that question.
It's very loaded.
I use NCE, and I've always used NCE, and just my own personal opinion now, but I think NCE is the easiest to understand and use. So a lot of people use, I mean, Digitrax is probably the most popular one.
Oh, really? Okay.
But I would talk to some people in your area, wherever you are, because the best thing is to have a system that other people in your area are using, so that you can
help you all
compare notes and all that.
All right. Loaded question, but that's the opinion. All right, our next question is from Chuck in Alaska, working in O scale. Do you know how I could model a decorative fountain that's shooting up in the center? I want it to be in the middle of my pond, and I want some kind of simulated water spray, but not using real water. So a shooting up fountain
That
effect.
is a good question. I mean, I've seen like little Christmas displays. They use fiber optics, those very small
Those
fiber
very thin
optics, and they
wiry
make kind of
lights.
a what would you call it, a blossom
Yeah.
of fiber optics that come out and hang down, very thin, very thin. And then you can actually use like a flickering light on the underside to give it the effect that it's moving water. I mean, that's the best thing I can think of.
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Fred in California, working in HO scale. Do you know of an over-the-counter chemical that will blacken locomotive wheels and maintain electrical conductivity? The black must not come off on the rails or otherwise wear off.
Well, they did sell metal blackener, and I think what happened to the blackener that was out there, it was some horrific chemical that you didn't want didn't want to breathe. And I think it's kind of, as far as I know, I think it's been kind of taken off the market. I have a little bottle of it left over, and I use for little things. But even that stuff, it would etch away the black in the metal, but it was not conductive, and so you'd have to clean off the top of the rail. But of course, if you're modeling an active railroad, the top of the rail would be shiny anyway.
Yeah.
And most people now just paint.
Yeah, paint over it.
Paint the rail weathered, and it actually gives you more color. I mean, that metal blackener was kind of a gunmetal, sort of a oily black color, but
really only get one choice.
You clean off your rail real good. I use lacquer thinner because a lot of times when the rail track is manufactured, it can have a little oily, just from the manufacturing, a little oily surface. Clean it off with a brush and lacquer thinner just to make sure the rail is really clean, and then just spray it. That's what I do.
That's what you do. All right, our next question is from Hank in Clinton, New Jersey, working in O scale, and he asks, what is standard gauge?
Well, if he's referring to real railroads, standard gauge would be what we use around here primarily in the United States, and other places in the world. It would be a gauge of 4 foot 8.5 inches between the rails, which we acquired from England. Oh. Because they had trains before we did.
They did, yes.
And so the very earliest trains over here were actually locomotives, were imported from England.
Yeah.
And we did have other gauges. The Erie Railroad in the old days used a 6 foot gauge, and there were other railroads that used narrow gauges, and like say in mountain areas they used narrow gauges, say a 3 foot gauge, which would just wind around in the mountain canyons better. They could, with smaller equipment, sharper curves, and all that kind of thing. And there were even 2 foot gauge railroads up in Maine.
Oh, very small.
And other industrial railroads that were 2 foot gauge. But for the most part, everything is standardized on 4 foot 8.5, and that's called standard gauge.
The standard gauge. Okay, our next question is from Paul in San Francisco, working in HO scale, a lot of HO scale. What will remove factory paint from a Cato engine or Cato engine?
Well, you have to experiment. We've talked about it before. I have some scale coat, what's called wash away. We've had it. We showed it on the show. I don't know, many shows back, but. It's supposed to be non-toxic, and I bought a bottle and I haven't used it because I haven't really had anything I needed to strip. But it's supposed to work and be non-toxic. Yeah. And people in the old days, they'd use lacquer thinner and brake fluid and I don't know, just all this stuff and a lot of toxic stuff. And of course, you never know what the models are painted with. I mean, the paints can vary, but from manufacturer to manufacturer. So offhand, I couldn't tell you what you could use on a Cato, but I would recommend trying some of this wash away. Okay. And see how that works.
See how it goes for you. Our next question is from Joseph in Florida. It doesn't list a scale, but it says, I'm constructing a brick factory building and I would like to duplicate the real-life prototype of signs painted directly on the brick. The black must not come out. Oh, that's a different question. Are decals the best way to do this, or are stencils / freehand better? The signs would be a white background with black letters.
Well, there are multiple ways of doing that too, although a typical decal, the film would be thicker. Yeah. And so you can print out a sign on a computer printer. Yeah. And actually get signs off the internet, and you can scale them to whatever you want and print them out. Print them on paper, and then guys actually would take the paper and on the back side, sand it with a very fine sandpaper and get the paper really thin. Oh. Well, then somebody figured out you can actually take like tracing paper. Oh, yeah. And that won't go through your computer printer, but if you tape the tracing paper onto regular paper,
You can trace it over.
Well, no, but just because that's just to hold it when it's going through the printer.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll all jam up.
Oh, just
so you
hold
just
it on
tape,
there.
tape it onto regular paper so it'll go through the printer, and then print it onto the tracing paper.
Oh, and then you put it on there, and it's got that little see-through
And then
kind of effect.
you can put that, glue that down. You can glue that down with a fine film of glue like matte medium.
Matte medium.
And then, of course, if you want it even more weathered, you can weather over the top, or you can actually take a very fine grit sandpaper again, you know, like a 600 grit, and actually sand it from the top. So you're going to sand it
even
down so you
thinner.
can barely see it, or you can have other weathering over the top.
Yeah.
You could have dirt and grime and whatnot over the top of the sign, too.
All right, I think it's time for our last question.
Really?
Yes, our question is from Robert in Georgia, who asks, is Atlas, N-Scale, and Easy Track interchangeable? Yesterday I purchased a Bachmann set 24 by 44 with 8 rolling stock.
I do not. I mean, I can't honestly say I've tried it, but I don't think so. I mean, I know Easy Track has a kind of a little peg sticking out where they interconnect and all that. And I really don't. I don't think so. You'd have to try it. Sorry,
See if
that's
it
a
works
bad
out.
note to end the show on.
Okay, we'll do one more question to have a better ending there. Let's see. Frank from Ohio asks, what is a good model railroad layout for kids? Or starting with kids?
Well, there are actually books with the starter layouts. When I was a kid, it was a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and you laid everything out on there, and that's depending on the scale and your space, and there's a lot of variables there. But yeah, that's, you know, buy a good quality one. Don't buy a train set from a discount store or someplace like that. Get a good quality one because it's worth it in the long run. And hopefully your child will stick with trains their entire life. That's what happened to me.
Yeah, and here we are.
Yeah, so there you go.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us for this month's Track Talk Live. I'm Miss Choo Choo, this is Mr. Clickety, and we will see you next time for another exciting episode of Track Talk Live. See you.